Also, Herr Elsen, hören Sie mich?
Ja, ich höre Sie.
Gut, jetzt ist es ein Meeting.
Vielen Dank, super.
Jetzt haben wir das zumindest schon mal. Da sind die Dolmetscher.
Ah, da Breakout Sessions, da ist es.
Genau. So. Genau, und da können Sie jetzt wählen, wie viele das brauchen.
Ja,
Entweder automatisch oder Sie teilen die selber zu oder Sie sagen, die dürfen selber reingehen, wo sie wollen.
genau. Und die können dann auch sofort reden. Da muss ich nicht nochmal extra jetzt die jeweils zu- und abschalten, dass sie reden können.
Das können wir jetzt gleich mal ausprobieren. Was bin denn ich jetzt gerade? Ach so, bin hier auch als Missio drin. Moment, ich gehe mal schnell raus und dann.
Müssen wir eigentlich den Dolmetscher nochmal neu eingeben dann? Ich rufe den Dolmetscher an, die sollen sich wieder zuschalten, oder? Am besten. Das machen wir jetzt.
Bin bloß, glaube ich, gerade aus dem Anydesk rausgekommen.
Ja. Guten Tag, Herr Fromm. Könnten Sie sich wieder über den Link zuschalten? Ja. Ihre Kollegin ist schon drin, wenn ich es richtig sehe. Sie sind jetzt im Wartezimmer, sehe ich das richtig? Alle zulassen. Hallo. So.
Können Sie uns hören?
Ja.
Wunderbar, sehr gut.
Jetzt können wir auch Breakout-Sessions einrichten, genau.
Sehr gut. Aktuell haben Sie noch die Aufnahme eingeschaltet. Sie nehmen die ganze Session gerade auf.
Okay. Also ist es für Sie ein Problem, wenn wir das aufnehmen und nur wenn wir es verwenden für Zwecke? Oder wie war das mit den Regelungen?
Genau, da gibt es einen Unterschied dann zwischen einer internen und einer externen Verwendung.
Mhm.
Genau. Das können wir aber auch im Nachhinein nochmal bequatschen.
Okay.
Genau. Ich glaube, das hatten wir jetzt im Angebot nicht mit drin.
Genau, wir haben gesagt, wir besprechen das, wenn wir es an dem Abend auch. Ich habe jetzt von 2 Kolleginnen gehört, sie würden gerne das aufgenommen haben, intern.
Mhm.
Vielleicht könnten wir das dann demnach noch besprechen. Wenn das,
Auf jeden Fall. Ja, absolut.
ich hoffe, dass wir den Referenten jetzt noch zuschalten können. Genau. Sind Sie jetzt, aber es ist nicht im Dolmetscherkanal, wenn ich das richtig sehe. Das heißt, die müssen wir nochmal neu eingeben.
Genau. Da müssten Sie uns genauso wie eben wieder zuweisen und dann die Funktion aktivieren.
Wir bräuchten es in jeweils beide Richtungen wahrscheinlich. Genau. Aber Sie müssen in beiden Kanälen ja zugeschaltet werden, oder? Genau. Beide. Ach super, es geht beides. Okay, wunderbar.
Ja, wer ist jetzt da beigetreten?
Der Dr. Stauch von Aachen und der Referent.
Also, lass uns die doch mal beitragen.
Ja.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Hello
Okay.
together.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi, Christian. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you. How are you?
Fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
All right, great. I just sent you my final text.
Okay.
You just sent about 2 minutes ago.
The PowerPoint.
Yes, the PowerPoint. So
Yeah.
are you going to are you sharing can I share from here, or you can share the PowerPoint?
You can share the PowerPoint as well.
Great, thank you. So you're gonna give me co-hosting
Yes.
responsibility. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Professor Stan. Hi, how are you?
Professor Stan. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's
You're so
little
formal,
German,
Martin.
huh? Okay, Stan. Hi.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Good evening from Germany.
Good evening. You see what I got here.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
They finally arrived.
Yes. Thank you.
We weren't quite sure about your address, but apparently, so we put everything we found on it, and apparently they made it.
Thank you.
You got my mail from the Synod part too?
What's that?
Did you get my mail from the Synodal part?
Yes,
well?
I got it. Sorry, I've
No,
not
so
replied.
that's
but,
just okay. That's just
I will read everything you sent me, because we are having very vibrant conversation in among us Africans about why the item on sexual morality or ethics, why is it that you guys couldn't come to a conclusion?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm very curious what you say, what you will tell us.
Yes, But I'm not bringing that up for this presentation. That's not what I was told to say.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's just a part.
Yeah.
Maybe we still have a few organizational things to discuss. Maybe you would be running your schedule, your workshop on your own,
Okay.
or so will you set up the breakout sessions, or should I do that?
Yeah, you should do the breakout sessions. I have the slides that present what people need to do during the breakout.
Okay. And how many people should be in a breakout session?
How many are you expecting? It's just to
25 people.
Yeah, so you can have 5 groups.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the event at 6 p.m., I would briefly welcome, and then Dr. Stauch from Missio Aachen would briefly welcome, and afterwards I would introduce you, and then you can start with your workshop.
Okay. Thank you.
Und jetzt wäre es schön, wenn Herr Fromm, und könnten Sie nochmal wegen des Dolmetschens vielleicht sich nochmal zuschalten. Okay. Ja. Ja, ich höre.
Wunderbar. Stan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Stan. This is Dominic. I'm
Hi,
one of the
Dominic.
interpreters today. I'm sitting
you.
here with my colleague Leah, and we will be doing the interpretation today. And you just have to turn on the interpreting function, and down below on your screen you'll see a little globe. In your Zoom screen you should be seeing a little globe
On the screen.
Down below in the menu, where you also have the number of participants, the chat, the live transcript, where you can share your screen and all that.
Yeah, I see share screen, live transcript. What else? Reactions.
Im Moment ist ein Globus zu sehen.
Ich müsste jetzt nochmal starten. Ich würde jetzt
Okay,
starten und dann
Okay, so Stan, Christian will start the function in a minute, and then you'll see a little globe, and if you click on that globe, you can choose the language you want to listen to, and obviously for you that will be English, and we will then do the interpretation for you, do the interpreting for you into English as soon as someone speaks German. So you'll only hear us and not them speaking German, and as soon as someone speaks English, we are not going to speak at all, and you will hear them speaking English. So there should be no communication problems at all. Okay.
Do you see the globe?
Okay.
You have to choose English.
Yes, I've seen it. Yes. Yes, I can. Okay, I'm gonna take 1 minute, Christian. Let me get some water.
Yes, of course. Okay.
Thank you.
Und dann würde ich vorschlagen, dass wir schon das Wartezimmer betreten lassen können, oder? Die Teilnehmer.
Also ich muss in 3 Minuten gehen, gell?
Ja, das passt. Aber ich glaube,
Einfach aus.
ich danke Ihnen herzlich. Ich glaube, das passt. Wir sind, oder Herr Dr. Stauch, wir sind soweit vorbereitet.
Ja, ich denke schon. Ja, ja. Genau.
Also ich würde begrüßen und dann würden Sie natürlich noch mal kurz begrüßen und dann würde ich kurz ins Thema einführen, ihn vorstellen.
Genau.
Dann lasse ich die Teilnehmer jetzt zu.
Ja. Ist ja auch schon 3 Minuten vor.
Genau.
Guten Abend.
Danke.
Ich würde vorschlagen, wir beginnen langsam. Sehr geehrter Herr Professor Illo, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, einen schönen guten Abend wünsche ich Ihnen aus München. Ich darf Sie ganz herzlich begrüßen zu diesem abendlichen Workshop und freue mich, dass Sie online via Zoom zugeschaltet sind. Ich möchte zunächst etwas zum heutigen Abend bezüglich des Dolmetschens sagen. Es gibt eine Dolmetscherin, einen Dolmetscher und Sie können unten in der Leiste, wird Ihnen ein Globus angezeigt, wo steht Dolmetschen und dort können Sie wählen, ob Sie den deutschen oder den englischen Kanal hören wollen oder ob Sie das ganz inaktiv lassen wollen, weil Sie sowieso es auf Englisch hören wollen, den Vortrag, beziehungsweise dann später ins Gespräch zu kommen. Ich hoffe, das ist für alle sichtbar. Unten ist der Globus auf Dolmetschen und dann den Kanal auswählen. Dann zum Ablauf. Professor Stan Illo wird zunächst einen Vortrag halten. Dann können Sie über 5 von ihm dargelegte Kernpunkte und Aufgaben in Breakout-Sessions diskutieren. Und danach können Sie Ihre Ergebnisse präsentieren und anschließend wird Professor Illo nochmal weiter in seinem Vortrag fortfahren. Aber bevor wir starten und Professor Illo ich ihn vorstellen werde, möchte Sie noch Herr Dr. Stauch von Missio Aachen herzlich begrüßen, mit dem wir in guter, bewährter Kooperation diese Veranstaltung abhalten.
Vielen Dank, Herr Elsen. Schönen guten Abend, Stan. Herzliche Grüße nach Chicago. Ich begrüße Sie alle aus Aachen. Vielleicht haben Sie es am Anfang gehört, das waren die Glocken des Aachener Doms. Ich bin hier für Missio Aachen. Wir machen diese Reihe, wie Herr Elsen schon sagte, zusammen mit Missio München. Und heute ist eben Ihr Gastgeber Missio München. Ich freue mich sehr, dass Stan für heute Abend zugesagt hat. Er ist ein exzellenter Kenner der Materie, und zwar sowohl für das Thema Synodalität als auch eben im interkulturellen Kontext, im afrikanischen Kontext jetzt ganz besonders. Und da freuen wir uns sehr, dass wir ihn gewinnen konnten für dieses Thema heute Abend. Es ist ja in aller Munde das Thema Synodalität, synodaler Weg, in Deutschland jetzt ganz besonders. Und ich denke, das wird eine sehr interessante Facette bringen, was Stan Illo Ihnen heute Abend noch erzählen will, beziehungsweise was wir in den Workshops auch noch miteinander erarbeiten werden. Ich würde die Gelegenheit nutzen, an der Stelle auch auf 2 weitere Veranstaltungen hinzuweisen, nämlich zum einen auf eine Digitalveranstaltung, für die der Referent von heute Abend, also Stan, auch bereits zugesagt hat, zum synodalen Weg im Spiegel der Weltkirche. Die wird am 12. Januar stattfinden. Und zum Thema Synodalität in der Großstadt wird es auch eine Digitalkonferenz geben am Ende des Monats, also am 29. September. Sie finden die entsprechenden Angaben auch dann auf den Homepages, beziehungsweise auf der Homepage von Missio Aachen. Ich dachte mir, das interessiert vielleicht unsere Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer von heute Abend. Aber wir wollen ja den Referenten heute Abend hören. Von daher nochmal herzlich willkommen an alle und damit gebe ich dann zurück nach München. Dankeschön.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank. Es wurde schon gesagt, Synodalität ist in aller Munde, auch nach dem letzten Wochenende in Deutschland. Heute wird die Funktionsweise des afrikanischen Palavers beleuchtet und einige theologische Entwicklungen der Synodalität, wie Sie der Ankündigung entnehmen konnten. Und darauf aufbauend wird Stan Illo erörtern, wie das afrikanische Palaver in den Dialog treten kann mit anderen neuen Ansätzen des partizipativen Dialogs. Zunächst aber möchte ich Sie noch kurz vorstellen. Professor Illo stammt aus Nigeria, wurde dort zum katholischen Priester geweiht. Er spricht neben seiner Muttersprache Igbo auch Französisch, Englisch und Italienisch. Und seine Studien der Theologie und Pädagogik absolvierte er in Afrika, Nordamerika und Europa. Er promovierte an der Universität von Toronto in Theologie mit dem Schwerpunkt auf kulturübergreifenden Strömungen der afrikanischen christlichen Geschichte und absolvierte einen 2. Doktortitel an der Universität von Südafrika in Soziologie. Neben seiner Lehrtätigkeit an der DePaul University Chicago ist er Gastprofessor am Institut für Sozialarbeit und Mission am University College in Nairobi und Gründer einer gemeinnützigen Organisation, die direkt mit afrikanischen Frauen zusammenarbeitet, um sie bei der Bekämpfung der Armut zu unterstützen. Außerdem ist er Herausgeber der African Christian Studies Series, Kommentator zu Afrika, Religion und Politik für Canada Television und Al Jazeera, Kolumnist für die CNN, African Voices und Premium Times. Außerdem ist er Blogger für die Huffington Post. Ich hoffe, dass ich die wichtigsten Aufgaben genannt habe und erwähnt habe. und möchte kurz noch zu den Interessensgebieten kommen. Das sind kulturübergreifende Studien, afrikanische Geschichte, afrikanisches Christentum und Weltkirche, Gleichberechtigung und Vielfalt in glaubensbasierter Bildung. Außerdem soziale Transformation sowie Religion und Gewalt. Professor Illo ist seine Forschungsschwerpunkte konzentrieren sich eben seit 2007 auch mit dem Aufruf von Papst Franziskus zu einer missionarischen Umkehr und der Krise des Missbrauchs, konzentrieren sich die Forschungsschwerpunkte auf eine Reform und Erneuerung der Kirche. Ich freue mich nun sehr auf den folgenden Abend, bin dankbar, dass wir Sie als Referenten und Experten gewinnen konnten und bin schon sehr gespannt auf Ihre Impulse und freue mich nun auf den folgenden Abend und wünsche uns allen eine interessante Zeit.
Thank you very much, Christian. I will share my screen. I'm just gonna take some time to get this done. All right. So everyone can see the screen, okay?
Yes.
So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to speak on the African Palaver, a model and gift for a synodal church. And because this is a workshop, it's going to be more like a training. So I will try to enunciate principles and practices that I think can help us understand the African Palaver. So, and I have summarized what I will say. First, on the left is a Palaver in process in Senegal. So the African Palaver begins with a presupposition that we all are connected and our stories are interconnected. So if there is no connection, if there is no community, there's no Palaver. So Palaver is a tool that developed because there is a community that is interconnected that wishes to build, sustain, nourish that connection. The life of the community is nourished, sustained, and strengthened through these kinds of relationship and shared participation. And in many African mythologies, you will hear constantly, growing up as a child, they say stories have no end. What does that mean? When you hear a story, you cannot rush into a conclusion about that story, because when another person hears that story, the person can come to a different conclusion. So stories have no end. You take someone's story and you walk with the mysteries in that story, and then you can never end the story, because ending that story is like shutting wisdom down. It's like trying to force on yourself a conclusion to something that shouldn't really be concluded, because stories are mysteries. Each individual story is a mystery. And the more you enter into that story, the more you discover those infinite pathways that can open to a very willing and discerning heart. So that's one point to remember, that stories have no end. So if you apply it to anything that is going on in our world today, how we draw our conclusions about things, how we make up our minds about people, about identities, about our beliefs, then you could see that the Palaver, by the very presupposition of its core value, is an openness to seeing and embracing and discerning the infinite ramifications of people's experience that should not be shut down through ideologies or even through dogmatic fundamentalism. The community must take the time to listen to everyone's stories, particularly the stories of those who are weak, those who have been marginalized, those who suffer injustice, and those who are suffering. In this sense, the African palaver is to be understood as the art of storytelling, the art of conversation, the art of communal search for ethical response to everyday challenges as we enter into the multiple stories that make up our collective stories. And then as we seek to find how these stories converge or diverge in bringing about or harming human and cosmic flourishing, which in African religious tradition we call abundant life. When humans and the entire cosmos are flourishing, we call it abundant life. So this is a summary of what I am going to talk to you about. And this is something that I've reflected a lot from my own childhood, growing up in a community where my father was the chief, listening to the elders, learning from many folklores, participating in these palavers. This is what I conclude as what the palaver is all about. In the rest of the presentation, I would go through it first by describing what the palaver is and locating it within the context of the church today and the world today, and then develop some principles, even placing the palaver side by side with the stories we find in the Bible, some principles and practices that I think can be helpful in entering and engaging the complex world of today with hope, with joy, and with a hermeneutic of love that is open to seeing more than seeing less in the experiences and sufferings, joy and sorrows of people in our world today. So I kind of like to share these two pictures. So this was a picture on the left is a picture of Hofgarten Historical Park. This picture was sent to me by a German dear friend of mine, Marion, and I was thinking just how can I explain the palaver tree? So I said, I take something that is in Germany, and then on the right, you see a palaver taking place in Senegal. And the palaver tree is not simply any kind of tree. It must be a tree that can provide a shade. The meaning of tree in Africa is very rich because a tree is always a sign of life. A tree has a root that goes deep, and then it shoots up into the heavens. So the tree is a link between heaven, the spiritual realities, and the earth. And then the human being is caught in the middle. So the tree is also called the palaver tree because when we come around that palaver tree, we come to see what gives life to us, to think about the ethics of life, the bond of life, what is hurting the community, what is hurting people. And we come also to listen. In many African societies, the tree, especially the palaver trees, are always found at the village center. You have this giant tree that you see in this. This is me talking with a community elder in a place called Soroti in Uganda. This is a typical palaver tree. Now, you sit here, you can see the roots of that tree. You can see how wide it is. It's like this is shooting to all the four corners of the earth. So these palaver trees are usually huge trees that can provide shade. The community must provide shade for those who are weather beaten by suffering, by pain, and by injustice. So the palaver space, and you can see the space there. This is a typical palaver tree in a village, and this is the community elder. And you can see me, this is how you have the palaver. The palaver is, it could be one-on-one, like you're talking with an elder. It could be a family palaver. It can be within a women's group or a men's group or a youth group. It can be the entire community. It can be also a spiritual palaver. It can be a palaver where a traditional healer brings people together to break a bad news to them or to give them some training about health. So just wanted to show that the palaver tree in itself shows that when the community gathers and when we are together, we have the strength of this giant tree. When we are apart, we are weak. So the palaver is, even in the space of the palaver, is in itself an aesthetics of community, an aesthetics of strength, solidarity, communication, and an aesthetics that invite us to practices, ethical practices that can lead to abundant life so that everyone can grow to be like this giant tree. So these are the steps I would take in developing the workshop. So first, I'd like to thank Missio for this opportunity. I like to start with a story. A 10-year-old boy was playing outside his home in the Kilimambogo area near Nairobi. The child wandered down a path towards the forest and was attacked by a dangerous 12-feet-long python. As the child screamed, the mother came running from the house. Other villagers came rushing to where the python was trying to strangulate this child. The men ran off to get weapons to kill the python, while the boy continued to scream even louder. His mother couldn't wait any longer, so she jumped on the huge python with her bare hands and forced the python to release her child. Both the mother and her son went free. So there is a saying, an African proverb, where there is love, nothing is impossible. And this is a true story. And in a sense, I want to thank Missio because many people throughout the world see in Missio this caring mother that shows love and compassion, that comes in solidarity to support and journey with so many churches in the global south. I happen to have gone to a school that was supported by Missio. Missio has been for many of us in Africa a lifesaver. Some of us went to seminaries supported by Missio. Our dioceses and church agencies have been helped to move people around from rural areas to get them to hospitals, missionaries, especially in poor communities, and to move goods through buses bought through Missio's funds. And we have all studied in schools or seminaries or been treated in hospitals built through Missio. So on behalf of so many of my brothers and sisters in Africa, I want to say thank you to you all, Missio, and all our German brothers and sisters. The German Catholic community is a great friend to Africa. As we learn in the story I just shared with you, where there is love, nothing is impossible. Or as we say in my own part of Africa, Eastern Nigeria, ekene anaye juafo. That means saying thank you, thank you, thank you. If it is like food, you can never have enough of it. So thank you. And it's on that note of love that binds all people together, that moves someone in Aachen to care for someone in Enugu, Nigeria, who is starving or who has difficulties. Is that kind of love, I think, that should be at the center of everything that we do in the church. And it is that love, on that hermeneutic of love, that I think I want to build this workshop on the African Palaver. So when we look at the context of the church today, I think there is a greater need to commit ourselves to synodality, working together as God's family, listening to the stories of one another, so that by listening to these stories, we can hear again the voice of God speaking to us in new ways today. And getting an understanding of the African Palaver, I think, can offer a model for a synodal process. And I'm not saying that the African Palaver method has no limitations. There are lots of it, as we will talk about towards the end of this presentation. So looking at some of the principles, method, and process of the African Palaver can help us to see an ideal of a possible way of improving the synodal process and method that we have that is actually rooted in Western parliamentary method, and it has many limitations. I believe that a greater exchange and dialogue between the churches in the world, example, Africa and Europe, Nigeria and Germany, Austria and India, Argentina and Kenya, this is the way to go, because as Christianity crosses different cultural and spiritual frontiers, it is picking up different values, different good things from countries beyond the West. So the greater collaboration, conversation, dialogue that we have among the churches of the world can help us to find best practices in one part of the world that can help other parts of the world. And that's why I am very grateful that you guys have the opportunity to share in our understanding of a synodal process that we call the African Palaver. Now, if we look at the church today, we see that we have a challenge, the danger of a single story. What is the church? The church is not simply an essentialized notion of an ecclesial community. The church is not simply something that is an archetype, so that this is who we are. The church is always in the making. The early church was bold. They were bold in confronting the challenges and opportunities that God was opening to them by the power of the Holy Spirit. And it's that boldness that helped them when the community was going through some difficulties, as we find in Acts of the Apostles chapter 4. What did they do? They decided to create the diaconate because they needed to listen to the concern of the Hellenists and women who were complaining that they were being neglected in the distribution of the church's charity. In our times, we have grown into what I call schismatic binaries. It's either you're conservative or you're liberal or progressive. You are for change or you are against change. You are for the tradition or you're for innovation. And so these dualisms, like we say in Africa, when elephants are fighting, who suffers? The grass, because they'll be stomping on the grass. So the poor, the marginalized, our brothers and sisters who are in the community, LGBTQ community, for instance, these are the people who are suffering. Our women who are being neglected in church's leadership, these are people who are suffering while people are fighting for power, for dominion, and for all kinds of ideological reasons that I think are often far removed from the evangelical passion and enthusiasm of Jesus to take the gospel to the existential peripheries of life. So what we fight for is that we're using one reality to explain all reality. It's a problem of failing to embrace inclusion, diversity, and to be bold in listening to the Spirit as the Holy Spirit leads us to the new realities that we did not anticipate 100 years ago, even 10 years ago. The boundaries are shifting, the boundaries are changing, and the church must evolve in understanding the changing boundaries of faith and life in our churches and in our world. If we have to get young people connected to the church, if we have to get people really caring about what the church means today, if we have to get other religions to see that our religion is a religion that really gets it about the movement of the Spirit in history. So we can no longer use one rule to govern everything. This is why I think within our own church today, there's a, in philosophy, we call it fallibilism, the sense that our knowledge is imperfect. Our teachings are imperfect. Our churches are imperfect, and so always subject to conversion, revision, as we meet new evidence, new experiences of people. So I think that we have to have this openness to a ceaseless quest. We must set out again and again into the new. We must seek ever new dimensions of reality, ever new horizons of God, and free ourselves from the imprisonment to a single narrative. And what we are doing now is a very great manifestation of this openness to seeing other perspectives. This should be a practice within our churches. It's not just something that Missio does. It should happen in the German parishes, Catholic churches, in African parishes. It should happen at the Vatican. We must be open to new experiences. Otherwise, we will become a fossilized reality. And doing this requires seeing beyond my limited horizon. I've given this quote here, that it's always hard for people to see God or good or humanity or human dignity in those whose language is not mine, whose skin is a different color, whose faith is not my faith, and whose truth is not my truth. This is a quote from Jonathan Sachs, the former rabbi of London. The truth, he says, at the beating of monotheism is that God transcends the particularities of culture and the limits of human understanding. So God is always beyond our expectations and beyond our cultural or even doctrinal attempts to understand this God. God is always the beyond. God is always stretching us. And the human experience, just like God, is also beyond simply what we capture in our doctrine or what we capture in our formulation of our sacrament. So we need to begin this process of expansion of our horizon as we try to touch the unlimited horizon of God. And that requires listening to human experience and history. Our human stories will begin with what Pope Francis calls a culture of encounter. And I call the culture of encounter a revelatory moment that can help shape the ethics of community. So the starting point of the Palaver is, I say, stories. And when we talk about stories, we begin with what? A culture of encounter. Because you can only hear my story if we are staying in the same room, if we come together in the same space. And I know that many of us have different ethics of intersubjectivity. I don't want to burden you with that. For instance, Emmanuel Levinas, or Martin Buber, or the Vienna School. I don't want to burden you with that. But you look at, in general, in the West, the theory of intersubjectivity begins with how you understand the human person and how you understand the community. So the Palaver begins with this understanding of the human person and of the community and of the globe. So how is the human person understood? The human person is understood as interconnected. So I am because you are. We are because we belong. So community and the person are seen here as having an intimate and interconnected relationship. The community feeds the individual feeds from the community and feeds back into the community. However, individual autonomy is not subsumed or destroyed by community. Rather, individual autonomy is fully expressed and fully realized when the exercise of individual autonomy nourishes and feeds the life of the community to which that individual belongs. So Palaver is an ethics of intersubjectivity. That is saying, how can the bond of relationship between me and the other people and all creation, the unborn, the living, the dead, nature around me, cosmic, ecological realities. How can we strengthen that bond? So it's that intersubjectivity that is not imprisoned in dualism, just me and you. For instance, in a marriage, it's just me and my wife. No, it is the family that nourishes the community, and the community feeds the family. So the Palaver then becomes an ethics also of recognition that everyone belongs. Everyone should be listened to. So it's an ethics of recognition, because the world today, what do you feel, or how do you feel when you hear of the war in Ukraine? Some people will feel a connection. The Germans, a lot of Germans welcoming Ukrainians, a lot of Poles welcoming Ukrainians. What do you think about people who are drowning in the Mediterranean? What do you think of people who are drowning in the border of US and Mexico? How do we feel when we hear of so many people who are suffering and dying in the world? Is this ethics of recognition that Palaver actually offers, that everyone belongs? And because everyone belongs, then the Palaver is the ethics of inclusion. How do we include the voices and concerns of everyone? And it's not just to listen to, and we will come to that in the concluding part of this presentation. The Palaver is not just about talking, so it becomes an echo chamber. You know, like the synodal process we have now, everyone, they're compiling documents, and then you have to pass it on to another person, the bishop, and the bishop passes it on to Rome. It is a good thing, but it's not effective. In the Palaver, the decisions are not given to a global structure. The decisions, you know, like they say, all politics is local. So the inclusion of individuals, the inclusion of concerns of particular communities, particular individual, happens within that community. It is not taking, the power is not taken away from people when they have made decisions. Then they take the power to a higher authority outside of that community to implement that. Because that's not justice. That's not how abundant life emerges. So the Palaver is also ethics for healing, a therapy for broken relationship. A lot of the Palavers that happen, you have the regular Palavers, the normal family conversation in order to maintain law and order, in order to maintain justice, in order to maintain equitable distribution of resources in the community. That happens at the communal level. In those days, the community owned land in common. So you have to make sure everyone got land to farm. You have to make sure everyone has a house. You have to make sure everyone has food. There's also the Palaver that is convoked to deal with issues of justice. When people feel that they have been wronged by another, they bring the matter before the village Palaver. There's also the Palaver that happens as a result of breakdown in relationship, or as a result of sickness. When people are going through constant sickness, people believe, and I'm also convinced, that a lot of sickness people have today has to do with broken relationships. So the Palaver is also convoked to find restoration for those broken relationships. And what you have, one of the two principles, I think really that are very operative in the Palaver, is what you call onurubenwan. This is an Igbo word that says, when you hear the cry of your neighbor, you must not run away. You must move in the direction of the cry of the other to find out why he or she is crying, so that through the Palaver, you can listen. Why? What is going wrong? If it's something you cannot solve, you take it to the family head and they convoke a family Palaver. If it is something that cannot be solved by the family head, they call a clan and they have a Palaver. Or they move to the village. That's how it works. The way to listen, and that's the other principle, it means when you put your ear to the ground, you can hear even the voice of the cricket, the insects, they also have a voice. Why do they use this principle for the palaver? Is that everybody's voice should be heard, especially those whose voices are muted. That's why you say itontinani. That is putting your ear literally to the ground so you can hear the tiny insects who are speaking. That really captures the heart of the palaver, is that everyone must be brought to the village square. Everyone. So it's not simply few people coming. Sometimes it's representative in nature, but sometimes people are invited. We want to hear your story. It shouldn't be funneled through an individual, through one person or the other. So we move then to what we call our stories. Our stories. Why this emphasis on story in the palaver? What do we really understand by stories? We understand the world through stories. When we look at the Bible, for instance, the Bible is a story of stories, individuals, what they did, movement from one place to the other. We need to locate our own stories within this great story of God's action in the world. We should be able to locate ourselves and experience within the story of creation as a revelation of God's love in history. This is my own conviction, that everyone's story belongs. Just like in the palaver in the village, everyone belongs. Everyone's story should be heard. The challenge today, even within our churches and society, is that for us, how can we see the connection between my story as an African and your stories as Germans? How can we see the stories of the Ukrainians as my own story and listen to these stories? How can we hear the stories of other people who are not like me? How can we listen to the cry of creation? Because in the palaver, in the African ontology, even the river, even the mountains, they belong to the palaver. They speak to us. Sometimes that's why you gather under the tree. The tree speaks. The majesty of the tree in itself is what people want to stand erect. People shouldn't be knocked down by suffering and poverty or injustice. So how do we listen to the story of creation or the stories from history in the way we see ourselves, identity, the community we belong to, our beliefs as Catholics? Do we also hear and listen to the stories of the Lutherans, the stories of the Anglicans, the stories of Muslims, Hindus, and those who don't believe in anything? So the challenge is for us to see the connections, even between me as a Catholic and a Muslim. The African palaver begins with this presupposition that stories have no end. As I have said, this is just repeating the summary that I gave. And so when we look at the church today, I think I see a similarity between the Bible and the African palaver. The Bible's use of parables as teaching tool, and the palaver's use of individual stories, and sometimes in resolving conflict, they go back to the stories of the ancestors. They go back to the myths of origin. They go back to the communal legends. The same thing you find in the Bible. We are always invited, when we read the sacred text, to a new future that is always some indeterminacy. It's very inconclusive, the narrative, so that you go and complete the story. The same way, the palaver, when Jesus tells a parable, he says, what do you learn from this parable? Sometimes they understand it, sometimes they don't. The same way in the palaver, conclusions are inconclusive because the conclusions are given for today. Tomorrow, that problem might take a new nuance. We cannot be imprisoned in a single solution to a perennial problem that can take different dimensions. So Richard Bockham, I want to make a citation here in his book on Bible and Mission. He says that the biblical stories runs from the old to the new, constantly reconstructing the past in memory and constructing the future in expectation. Again, reconstructing the past in memory and then constructing the future in expectation. Again, this is what the Palaver does. It's rooted in the memory of the past, what the ancestors did, what God did in the community, in creating people and allowing them to be who they are. And then how do we construct the future? Building on what we have. So the biblical narrative always locates us, believers, in the past. It takes us through the present into an open future that is always in the making. So biblical narratives are open stories that have no end, just like the Palaver, because we are being asked as believers, like Jesus at the end of the parable of the Good Samaritan, he says, go and do the same. Continue the story. Pass it on to others through authentic witness into what you have seen and heard. Again, similar. The Palaver tells you at the end of the conversation, using the stories of individuals, using the stories of the ancestors, and the cries of the earth, whatever the theme for that Palaver is, people are then told, you've had the story, go and do the same. Because the story is reconstructed. If it is a fractured story, the Palaver is an attempt through communal wisdom to reconstruct that story, to restore that story to its original beauty. And then everyone goes to implement and live out the story. So the church today has become locked up in closed narratives. It's no longer open stories because we are no longer listening to experiences of people. We want to subject the experiences of people into a single narrative. So these narratives of being and identity, then the church is caught in these tension-soaked battles of cultural wars and conflict over doctrinal purity. This is not simply a challenge to Europe and North America. It is a challenge to the whole world. Nationalism, tribalism, ecclesial tribalism, racism, populism, fear and anxiety, especially in the wake of the pandemic, have even driven us apart. And many people are forgetting that we are all connected. One world, one love, one God, one family, a common hope, and a common destiny in a common family. So what do we then do? In the next few slides before we take a break, I just want to then, what I've been describing now, I want them to put together so that you can understand. So what then is the Palaver? So when we talk about stories, I am an Igbo from Eastern Nigeria and West Africa. And so what I say here, I have taken from Professor Obiechina's essay, Ncheta, where it says, Ncheta means memory. Memory always offers us more. The Igbos have always remembered that they have a tree, and their storytellers have always reminded them of the need to tend this tree. For them, stories are important because stories are the center of memory. They are embodied in memory. For the Igbos, the story is eternal. Again, remember I say stories have no end. The story is eternal. It belongs in time, but it has a timeless quality. And when we talk about story, I'm not just talking about legends or myths. I'm talking about my story. My father's story, my mother's story, the stories of my grandparents, the human experience of living together in this world with all the beauties and challenges that we encounter. So the story has a timeless quality. It has the power to instruct, to remind people, to renew, and to direct. Is not circumscribed by time. So story is not limited by space and time. So that in their travels and through all the vicissitudes of flux and change, the Igbos carry with them a memory instructed by their stories. So the stories are rooted in memories, and memories nourish these stories. So stories bring us deeper into the world of the other person. Stories help us to see the power dynamics in every relationship. And why am I emphasizing the story? Because story is the method of Palaver. So you say, what is this Palaver method? Is listening to the stories of people and how these stories connect Because when we stop listening to the stories of people and these experiences that are always ever known, then we cannot grow. The community will be fossilized. And then we stay locked up in closed narratives of belonging, of beliefs, and narratives of behavior. So when we do that, we listen, we see who has more power, who has less power, who is benefiting from that structure, who is losing, whose interests are being served, and whose interests are forgotten. Stories thus serve in the African setting as places and spaces for lamentation for those whose voices are muted or suppressed. Stories serve as moments of transformation and for building the community because it takes everyone into the lived and direct experience of people. This is why it is important that everyone's voice be heard, because as the African proverb says, unless the lambs begin to tell their own stories, the hunt will always be about the lion. I hope you understand this. So the lamb that was killed by the lion didn't stay to tell the story. Is the lion, after eating, the lamb begins to say, I beat the lamb. If only the lamb was not killed, the lamb could have said that actually what a fight it was. But that's who tells the story. Who tells the story is very important. Memory in African traditional society is the storehouse of the worldview of people, is a repository. Memory is key to understanding the past. Stories are understood then as dimensions of the ancestral memory. I'm going quickly now because I want to wrap up in the next 5 minutes so we can take the break. Stories are understood as dimensions of the ancestral memory because everyone is located within the stream of wisdom and life that is ancestral. Stories are ancestral in the African palaver because the story of each individual goes back beyond them. You see what I mean? If someone is suffering, the ancestor is suffering as well. The earth is suffering as well. That's why a particular story is seen not just as the story of Stan, but rather the story of all of us, because we are all implicated. We all belong. The ancestral past, our generational present. So refusing to hear other story is seen as an offense against the ancestors and the land. Everyone must be allowed to speak the word, to speak their own reality. Thus, denying one the opportunity to speak is denying the person life and choking the life of the community and that of the ancestors who have given that person the life and wisdom the person wishes to share. So I think that theology or our synodal process can only be valid when it locates in the stories of humanity today the portrait of how God's people, through their daily narratives, are bringing about God's reign in history. So now, what is the palaver? I wanted to go through a circuitous manner because I think describing the palaver is better than maybe defining it. But this is the definition I have given of the palaver in my writings. The African palaver, in French, labre, a palabre, is a unique type of conversation. The art of conversation is a creative dialogue in the common search for practical solutions to everyday challenges and conflicts in intersubjective encounters, in family relationships, and in promoting, preserving, and protecting the common good among members of communities, and maintaining relationships and balancing interests between clans and ethnic groups. So is an art of conversation, is creative dialogue, and is a search for practical solutions to everyday challenges. So the palaver creates an open, honest, and inclusive space for communication and conversation in the search for consensus in the communal and interpersonal search for truth, ethical norms, and in the dispensation of justice. So the foundations of the palaver, I already said, is the realization that wisdom is not the private preserve of a single individual. And this is very important, in the Catholic Church and in our churches in general. Sometimes we think that wisdom is with those in authority. The Holy Spirit works in everyone, isn't it? That's why developing a theology of the people of God in our times is more important today, in order to free us from clericalism or hierarchism, where, like in the synodal process, it is still the bishop who calls the shot at the end of the day, even in the ongoing process that will end in October next year in Rome. At the end of that process, it will be the Pope still that will go back and decide which one should I take or which one should I leave. So decision making and decision taking are separated. We contribute somehow in having the conversation, but the one who takes the decision at the end of the day might be just the bishop of the diocese or the Pope in Rome. So I think that without going into these descriptions, I want to just look at the key principles of the Palaver, and then we'll take a break. It invites all people into the community to a sacred space for dialogue. Second, it is an ethics for consensus building. But also there is a point I want to make here. It's not always that the Palaver ends in a consensus. Even though it tries to heal divisions and hurts and wounds, it might be stretching it to say that all the divisions, hurts, and wounds were healed through the Palaver. Rather, the Palaver is a way of giving hope to those who are suffering when they know that their cry will be heard and that people are concerned. So somehow the Palaver also allows for dissensus, so disagreement. We cannot reach an agreement today, but we're not going to allow our sister to continue suffering. So we have to bandage her wounds while we wait in patience to converge again, to think about this and try to solve it in a different way. So not all problems can be solved, but there is room in the Palaver for the suspension of judgment so that people can think about it again. But the one who is suffering, the community must address the suffering first when it cannot reach a conclusion. The Palaver is a method that helps people to avoid extreme positions. And this is something I think that is very, very important in understanding how the Palaver works. There's some kind of fundamentalism that is creeping into even our church in our world. People hold on to their position and they don't want to change. They've made up their mind. The Palaver says you cannot distort the truth or divide the community simply because you don't want to change your mind. You're not being forced to change your mind, but rather you are asked to listen more to the story. Look at the story from different angles. Enter into the ancestral memory so that your concerns and the concern of other people can now be put together in finding how that could form some ethical response that meets the requirements of justice and good of order. So in the Palaver, there's no dogmatism. And interestingly, Africans didn't have catechisms before Christianity came. African religion is not doctrinal in that sense of having a code of canon law or a ritual that you must follow for Mass. So if you don't follow it, if you don't put your hand this way or that way, you've done the wrong thing. If you don't have your stole, no. It was more performative. That is, people acted more spontaneously than simply being restricted by rules, order, regulation, protocol, procedure. Just like the synodal process, you have to have instrumentum laboris, you have to have lineamenta, you have to write down questions, you have to answer. This is too much work for the typical African. I mean, in the Palaver, it is not about lineamenta. Someone comes to Palaver and something comes to mind, you say, oh no, it is not on the topic today. That's not how the Palaver runs. So there is always an attempt to be patient. Dialogue takes patience. It takes time. So there's no need to rush. There's no limit to say you only speak for 5 minutes. No, there is always an attempt to be patient and dialogue and allow people freedom to express themselves. So we like to break out, and this is going to be a very quick breakout because I want to wrap up with 2 more two more structures that I want to leave for you to think about. So let's take a breakout. I think, Christian, you will help with that. And I'd like you guys to read the Gospel of Mark 4:26 to 29, and then find out who had more power there. So about the seed. Was it the sower of the seed that made the seed grow? Or was it the power in the seed that made the seed grow? Was it the one who made the harvest grow? Who? Is it God, or who made the harvest grow? It says the seed is thrown out and you don't know what happens to it, but the seed is growing. And then you can find out any principle that you can share with us that made the seed grow. And I want you to think of this seed as the story of each person in the church. These stories have to be allowed to touch down the earth. They have to touch down the earth. They must grow in our churches. They shouldn't be shut down. Say, keep quiet, shut up. This does not belong here. So if the seed is the story, the word that comes from us as we move around, sharing the word of God, sharing love, sharing life, who makes the seed grow? So I'm going to stop here. The breakout will take place, and I say it's going to be a quick one, so you can have a quick conversation for 10 minutes, and then we can converge in the next 12 minutes. Thank you.
Ja. Ich bin müde.
So how much time do we have, Christian?
50 minutes.
So should we give the report of the groups, or should I give the final point, and then we can go to the group and then have question and answer?
I think you have to decide, but maybe you will talk.
Okay, so let me finish these 2 slides, and then we can go to Q&A and responses from the group. So I like to conclude by giving you 2 structures, and these are 2 tables to show really what happens at the Palaver and why is it different, and how is it different from the current synodal process and the Western style. And one of the persons whose works I have actually helped me to understand this ladder of participation is Sherry Einstein. He calls it the ladder of participation, and you see that. So I think you might locate, so the topmost here, citizen control, delegated power, that, and then partnership, that this is really where you have what you might call participation. And it's only when citizens are able to control the process as well as determine the outcome together that you really say that they are actively participating. That's why the essay I wrote is participatory synodality. And what does participation mean? Sometimes most of the things we do in the church, I think, is at this level, manipulation. Sometimes, you know, people are being put together. They're giving impression that they're being consulted, but nothing happens after. Then therapy sometimes is like, if you complain in the church, they said something is wrong with you. We give a typical example. The burning issue today in the church is the rights of participation of women in the church or LGBTQ members. So the therapeutic approach is what is current now. So if you're a woman saying, why am I not a priest in the Catholic Church? They think you got some problem. You need therapy. You know, you need to be helped. Something is wrong with you. Or information, number 3 is you being informed, giving instruction. This is how you do the synod. This is how we do it. This is our approach. This is the document you use. So Einstein is saying that is non-participation. And the second one is tokenism. It's just a token. Come together, let's talk, and we are listening to you. But then no one does anything with that. So we need to get to number 8, where is people controlling what is going on. And I know when you talk of control, it's more like power, but it's also, if you like, control here means that you are following the same principle of the ancient church, nothing about me without me, nothing about me without me. And people can negotiate and also help in bringing about the better outcome. And so based on this, I want to then leave you with, on the left is the current synodal method, on the right is how the African Palaver can be applied in today's church. So clergy, laity, theologians, scholars, and the elite are the ones who are participating in the synodal path. It's mainly the ones who are educated, who are enlightened, church leaders. Everyone is invited to the village square in the Palaver method. The village square is a space for everyone. There may be representatives, but the groups must decide that they want to be represented rather than being told to bring a representative. You see the point. So if it is the women's group, all of them can come. Or the group would decide, okay, I'm going to the market. I am taking care of my child. So they say, someone go and talk to us. But in the current synodal process, it is still very episcopal, it is very clerical, and it is very elitist. So the people at the very peripheries of our churches are not participating. you want to talk about LGBTQ issues, let LGBTQ members of our churches be the ones speaking. That's how the Palaver can operate. If you want to talk about women's issue, listen to the women talk to you from the rough ground of their own experience. If you want to talk about Muslims, or bring the Muslims to the Palaver table, bring the Protestants to the Palaver table. So the synodal process shouldn't just be something restricted to the Catholic Church, because it is not then a Palaver, because it's only few individuals. Then number two, the timetable for the discussion is set. So we have a structure, the way we do our synod, the lineamenta, instrumentum laboris, the working document. So in the Palaver, there's no timetable. And I know people will say it's going to be chaotic. People are giving room to speak without interruption. And the conversation can really last for days and months and years until people come to a comfort zone for the community and for individuals. In the current synodal process, topics are chosen, documents are circulated, and people must stick to the topic. In the Palaver, topics and themes are not chosen prior to the encounter. It is spontaneous and full of surprises. People can bring up things as they deem fit. You will not say, okay, you cannot bring that up, it's not in the topic today. And that's how the Holy Spirit actually works. It has to be spontaneous. It has to be experiential. So in the current method, people are busy preparing their text. They come prepared to make their point and defend it. In the Palaver, people come unprepared. They allow themselves to listen to others, and discussion actually grow from these spontaneous points of view. In the current method, participants avoid some topics, especially the controversial ones. Some topics are off limit in the current synodal process. You cannot talk about this. You cannot decide on this. In the Palaver, on the other hand, no topic is off limit. People have the freedom to speak their minds on things that matter to them. Everyone must be listened to, and everyone gets to speak their own truth and their own experience. In the current method, decisions are made and votes passed, sometimes without the input of those affected by those decisions. People's fate are sealed without their input, violating the principle that nothing about me without me. In the Palaver, decisions are made not by vote, but by consensus. The people most affected by decisions are allowed to speak to the community on how they think the community should proceed. In the current method is parliamentary, with rigid rules, procedures, and protocols about who is the leader and who is the follower. In the Palaver, it is participatory with flexibility on method, process, and procedures decided by the participants. In the current method, decisions are made to protect and preserve the status quo of the most powerful or the institution. In the Palaver, when decisions are made, it always reflects diversity within the community. In the current method, decisions are often closed. It's done deal. We voted on it, like the synodal path. We passed our decision, then the vote carried and the vote didn't carry. In the Palaver, decisions are open because the ancestral wisdom is like a well that cannot be sealed. It is a fountain that continues to give. I hope these structures can then help you to see how the Palaver operates. Now, in terms of who presides over the Palaver, those who preside are those chosen from the community, usually the elders, based on, in the family is the oldest who is the presiding, but he doesn't get to make the final decision. Decisions are made by everyone, and it comes through consensus. And community will know when that consensus is reached. They start singing, they start praying, because now they see the light from the ancestors. So I will say that we need then to create rooms for people to come into this Palaver space in the Catholic Church and in the world today. And we need to move away from this binary thinking and think of the Palaver the model as a Trinitarian Catholic center. And when I mean Catholic center, it's not Rome I'm talking about. I mean the center of divine love, the kind of love that makes someone in Munich be interested in what happens in Africa, the love that binds us together. That diversity we find in the Trinity, Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, they listen to each other. They show solidarity to each other. They participate in the life of each other. It's a bond of love in a bond of life. And that's what I call the Trinitarian Catholic Center. Where is the center of the church today? Is it the center of love or simply the center of power? Is it the center of privileges or the center of service? And I think that's why we need to go to the wisdom of the peripheries, those people whose voices are forgotten, the outcasts in our society, in our churches, those we think are the troublemakers. And in this era, our understanding has to be intercultural, interreligious, interdenominational, and interpersonal. That should be the root of intersubjectivity. So let us embrace this primacy of community as the space for recognition, for reconciliation, for participation and celebration of the ethics of inclusion, for human and cosmic flourishing. I like to conclude with Pope Francis's quote. He says, each of us can learn something from others. No one is useless, no one is expendable. So we need to find ways to include those on the peripheries of life. So we need to look at another way of looking at reality. And the voices, I think the Palaver is a voice from the periphery. And if we listen to such voices, we might find other wisdom beyond the Palaver that can help us. And I thank you for your interest in learning something different from where you are, and in learning something from Africa. And I hope to share, I will share this PowerPoint with you at some point. And danke und Gott segne. God bless you. And this is a music from Uganda saying thank you. Thank you very much.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank. I was very pleased to have you here this evening, to welcome you. Und durch Ihr tiefes Verständnis für die interkulturellen Dimensionen des Lernens in einer sich wandelnden Welt konnten Sie uns auch die Schönheit dieser verschiedenen Kulturen, die sich gegenseitig fruchtbar bereichern können, nahebringen. Und dafür bin ich sehr dankbar für die interessanten Einsichten und den Blick auf die Synodalität der Kirche und welche Chancen uns das afrikanische Palaver bieten kann. Ich werde im Nachgang auch die Folien, oder Herr Dr. Stauch auch, wir werden die Folien an Sie gerne weiterversenden. Und ich danke herzlich für Ihre Teilnahme und dass Sie sich die Zeit genommen haben, Stan Tuilo zu uns zu kommen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I look forward to meeting you all someday in person.
That will be great.
Yeah. Maybe in January, Martin. Maybe in January I come to Munich.
Ah, that would be great, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you everyone, and to see you again soon.
Thank you very much, and we keep in touch.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Bye.
Gottes Segen.
Thank you. Amen. Thank you, Christian. I will send you the text.
Yes, thank you. Ah, okay, thank you.
I'll send you the text. I'll send it tomorrow.
Okay. Yes.
I'm rushing to the airport. I have a flight in the next 2 hours.
Ah, okay. Then a good flight. Yes. Okay.
I'm going to Denver to give a talk tomorrow.
Ah, very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope I didn't bore you guys too much. I hope it was meaningful.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Ja.
Thank you. Thank you.
Und danke
Okay,
auch für die Übersetzungen.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good flight.
Thank you.